welcome to module number 7 of CADS 3853. In this module, we are going to continue to take a look at different types of markup. In last module, we took a look at the initial markup particularly, and in this module, we are going to learn about cumulative markup. This is the same slide we've already seen in the previous module. I just wanted to point to the fact that there are 3 types of markup, and we already took a look at the initial markup in the previous module, and this module is going to be about cumulative markup, and we have one more module to come on the other type of markup, which is maintain markup. So in last module, we learned that the initial markup is the markup that is calculated based on the original retail and build cost. And we can calculate an initial markup for an individual item or a group of items. When the initial markup is applied to the group of item, and especially when it is applied to the total merchandise handled, all the merchandise that we are handling, including the opening inventory plus all the new purchases that we make, that initial markup is what we call cumulative markup. Okay, so definition of the cumulative markup is basically the initial markup percent on total merchandise handled, okay, the opening inventory that we started with, plus all the new merchandise that we purchased newly, so that we call purchases, all combined together that constitute the total merchandise handled. And what's the initial markup percent on that? And that indicates our cumulative markup. Again, because the initial markup is a planned figure, cumulative markup is naturally another, again, a planned figure, because it is nothing but the initial markup of the total merchandise handled. Well, all markup percent is percent of retail. The different types of markup will use different type of retail figure to calculate the markup percent. For cumulative markup percent, the retail figure that we're using is the cumulative original retail. So that is cumulative markup percent is percent of cumulative original retail. Whereas the initial markup percent, that was percent of original retail or initial retail, right? Because this is the cumulative markup percent is the initial markup percent of the total merchandise handled. We're going to have to add up all the original retail of all total merchandise handled, which will constitute what we call cumulative original retail. Okay, so the cumulative markup percent is percent of that cumulative original retail. So if we express the cumulative markup percent in a formula, that would be any markup percent will be markup dollar over retail, and we just apply the cumulative markup and cumulative retail for the cumulative markup percent calculation. So the cumulative markup percent will be cumulative markup dollar over cumulative retail dollar. Then what's the cumulative markup dollar? Any markup dollar is the difference between retail and cost. Here, the retail is a cumulative retail, and the cost is cumulative cost. So the cumulative markup dollar will be the difference between the cumulative retail and cumulative cost. So that makes the cumulative markup percent formula to be now cumulative retail minus cumulative cost over cumulative retail. Okay, we'll take a look at on the next slide what we mean by cumulative retail and cumulative cost again. So here we're looking at an example where we're looking at the total merchandise handled, which is the bottom row in this grid, and the top 2 rows are showing the opening inventory and purchases season to date. STD means season to date. So from the start of the season until now, how much purchases have been made is what that row is indicating. So total merchandise handled, TMH, or the cumulative merchandise, will be the combination of the opening inventory that we started the season with, and all the new purchases that we have made from the start of the season till now, till to date. So it shows that the opening inventory was $180,000 at retail value that carried a markup of 47%. And all the purchases season to date combined together were amounted to $990,000 at retail value, with a markup of 49%. Okay. If this is the case, then what will be the cumulative markup percent? That's the question mark goes to the TMH, total merchandise handled, and the markup percent for that TMH, that cell. So to calculate the cumulative markup percent, we need to know the cumulative retail and cumulative cost, because cumulative markup percent equals cumulative retail minus cumulative cost over cumulative retail. Okay, we know that markup percent is R minus C over R, one of the most famous formulas that we have seen, right? But we don't know those two figures, the cumulative retail and cumulative cost yet. Then how do we calculate the cumulative retail and cost? Okay. Cumulative retail is nothing but all the retail value of all the opening inventory plus all the purchases. And the cumulative cost is a similar way. The cost of all the build cost of all the opening inventory that we have plus the build cost of all the purchases. So we need to know the build cost or the cost of the opening inventory and purchases for us to be able to find what the cumulative cost will be, combining these the opening inventory and purchases. The same goes for the retail. So since we already know the retail value of the opening inventory and purchases, we have to add these two up for us to be able to calculate what the cumulative retail is going to be. So the then question goes to how do we calculate the cost value of the opening inventory and the cost value of the purchases? Okay. Because we need the cost value of both of these two categories of merchandise for us to be able to combine them to calculate the cumulative cost. Okay. Now here we need to take a look at each category of merchandise one by one. So let's take a look at the opening inventory. Okay, what do we already know about the opening inventory? We know the retail value of the opening inventory and the market percent of the opening inventory. Now this becomes the question of one that can be applying one of the three cases that we have taken a look at in the basic markup calculation, right? This is the case where we know the retail value and market percent. We're supposed to calculate the cost based on that. Okay, this is the RCM relationship again applied. Then what will be the formula? When we know the retail and market percent and we're supposed to calculate cost, what was the formula? Yes, that would be that the cost dollar equals the retail dollar times 100% minus market percent. Here we're using that one of the important cases to calculate cost. So in this case, the retail was $180,000 and the market was 47%. So that cost will be $180,000 times 100% minus the 47%, which is 53%. That gives us the answer for the cost value of the opening inventory to be $95,400. And we can do exactly the same thing for to calculate the cost value of the purchases season to date. We know the retail value and market percent for purchases, and we can calculate the cost by using the formula of R times 100% minus market percent, which gives us the answer of, so that will be $990,000 times 100% minus 49% markup. Okay, that would be $504,900 cost for the purchases. Okay, so now that we know the cost value of the opening inventory as well as the cost value of the purchases, we just have to combine them together, add them up, and that will give us the cumulative cost for the total merchandise handled, which is $600,300. And we can do the same thing to get the total, the cumulative retail for the total merchandise handled by adding up the retail value of the opening inventory and the retail value of the purchases. So they gave us the cumulative retail of $1,170,000. Now that we know the cumulative retail and cumulative cost value, then how can we calculate the cumulative markup percent? We're just looking at the bottom row now. So this is the case where we know the R and C, and we're supposed to calculate MU percent. Okay, so that would be R minus C over R, or cumulative retail minus cumulative cost over cumulative retail. So that gives us the final answer of 48.69% for the cumulative markup percent. Alright, I hope that wasn't too complex. And so now let's practice at the similar kind of setup one more time. Okay. So the buyer for men's ties has an opening inventory of $12,000 at retail value, which carries a 49.5% markup. And new ties costing a total of $2,100 were added to the inventory. So $2,100 is new purchases, the purchases cost, right? Cost of the purchases. And they were marked to sell for $4,200 total. So that is the selling price, which is the retail value, right? The retail value of the purchases. Okay, and then given this information, let's find the cumulative markup percent on the total merchandise handled. So that includes both the opening inventory and the new ties, new purchases that they made. Okay, so I recommend that you, on your lecture notes, you will have a grid, the empty grid that looks just like the grid that we saw in the previous problem. And I recommend you to kind of draw that grid and kind of fill out the grid. Then that way you can be easily kind of leading to the final answer without getting interrupted or getting confused in the middle of it. So let's pause the video here for a while you're working on the problem. Alright, let's take a look at the answer together. Okay, well, let's first plug in all the numbers, the data that were given in the problem in this grid. So we have the opening inventory, purchases, and total merchandise handled, those three rows in the spreadsheet here, and then cost and retail markup columns. And we know the retail value of the opening inventory was $12,000, so that's the retail opening inventory retail value. The markup percent was 49.5%, that was given. And also the problem gave that the new ties and new purchases were made with the cost value of $2,100 and the retail value of $4,200. So those numbers are given in this grid. And we're supposed to calculate the cumulative markup percent based on these numbers. The first step will be now taking a look at each category of the merchandise one by one. So let's take a look at the opening inventory first. Okay, again, this is the case where we know the retail value and market percent of the opening inventory, and we're supposed to calculate the cost value of the opening inventory. An easy calculation based on one of the most important three formulas that we have seen in terms of the markup calculation, which is cost equals retail times 100% minus markup percent. Okay, so the cost of the opening inventory is equal to $12,000 retail times 100% minus 49.5% markup, right? So that gives us the cost value of $6,060 for the opening inventory. And now moving on to the purchases, we already know the cost and the retail value of the purchases that were just given in the problem, so we don't have to worry about further calculations. From these numbers, now we can calculate the cumulative cost and cumulative retail for the total merchandise handled by combining the cost value of the opening inventory and purchases. That will lead to our cumulative cost. And if you combine the retail value of the opening inventory and the retail value of the purchases, that will be our cumulative retail. So here we have the cumulative cost of $8,160 and the cumulative retail of $16,200. And based on these two numbers, we can also calculate cumulative markup percent. Now the case is when we know the retail and cost, and we're supposed to calculate the markup percent. Case number one of the three most important cases, right? So that would be 16,200 minus 8,160. And divide that by 16,200. Okay, so that gives us the final answer of 49.63% of cumulative markup. So the key takeaways from the cumulative markup module are first, the fact that the cumulative markup is the initial markup of the total merchandise handled. And second, total merchandise handled include the opening inventory and purchases. Okay. And third, when we know any two of the RCM of the opening inventories or purchases, then we can calculate the other aspect of the opening inventory and purchases. For example, if we know the R and M of the opening inventory, we can calculate C. If we know the C and R, then we can calculate M. If we know the C and M, then we can calculate R by using one of those three most important, most frequently used cases, the three formulas that we learned from the last module. And we can do the same thing for purchases. As long as we can do that, then we can easily come up with the cumulative cost and cumulative retail for the total merchandise handled, from which we will be able to derive our cumulative markup percent, the final answer. So this was the short module 7, and thanks for listening, and don't forget to work on module problem assignment number 7. Thanks, bye.